With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Kufhei. The Daf began speaking about the rules regarding the formulation of brachas. And the rule is that when a bracha expresses a single theme, we open up, as we have to by all brachas, directly or based on a prior bracha with Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, but we don't have to conclude with Baruch Atah Hashem, as we don't, not by Birchas HaMitzvahs nor by Birchas HaPeiros. Now we're going to continue to learn that when Shabbos departs and someone is in the middle of a meal, as many eat Shalosh Seudos towards the end of the day, and as we learned a few daf ago, that when a person is having a meal going into Shabbos, so we follow Shmuel and we follow Rav that you have to be poides mapu umekadish from Shkia. What will happen if the same is in Havdalah? Person began a meal, beheter, before the Shkia, Shabbos afternoon, and the meal is extending into Motzei Shabbos. Before making Havdalah, one may not eat. One may not even drink, as we'll learn in the beginning of today's sugya. Question is, do you have to be poides mapu to make Havdalah or not? And if the answer is not, which is how we paskin, we don't do poides mapu and mavdil, why not? Why is there a difference between the insistence of making kiddush the moment to shkia, even though you began a meal, versus going into Motzei Shabbos? We're going to learn a machlekes whether one can drink water after shkia before Havdalah. We're going to learn about the main obligation of Kiddush into Shabbos, which is when we make Kiddush, we don't only say Baruch Atah Hashem Borei Pri Hagafen. That we make a bracha that speaks to or speaks about the sanctification, the sanctity of Shabbos. That's called Kiddusha, Kiddush. Friday night we make Kiddush. Aside of the Borei Pri Hagafen, we're not even mentioning the opening clause of Yom Hashishi, like when we learned the Havdalah, we were not even speaking about the Hinei Kei L'Shuasi. We make Yayin, Machlekes, but we follow Beis Hillel, Yayin and Kiddush. Shabbos day, even though we call it Kiddush, as we'll start to speak out now, we'll have a lot more in the later dafim, that to say Kiddush before you have a meal Shabbos day is only a rabbinic obligation. Unlike Friday night's Kiddush, which is a biblical obligation. And for the Shabbos day Kiddush, one does not say in the bracha, Kedusha Shabbos. Now we add many beautiful psukim prior, but the Kiddush of Shabbos day is simply making a Borei Pri Hagafen. The question we'll have over here is that if a person did not make Kiddush Friday night, do they say the bracha of Kedusha Shabbos day or not? Or not? That will be a Gavaldika topic, which will also speak a little bit about if someone doesn't make Havdalah Motzei Shabbos. We're going to learn that Havdalah is something that will need to be made up until a certain point. It's really up until Tuesday night. We're going to have another theme of Kavod Shabbos versus Kiddush on Shabbos. Kiddush means to make Kiddush. Kavod Shabbos means that when you have a meal on Shabbos, both night and day, it's a mitzvah because of Oinig to make the meal special, to add delicacies, which also includes wine. Now, there's a contrast. When it comes to Kiddush, the main Kiddush is Friday night. Yayin v'Kiddush. Shabbos day only Borei Pri Hagafen. But when it comes to the concept of adding to the uniqueness, to the delicacies of the meal, if you have to pick and choose, the day meal is more important than the night meal. And now, if you only have a little bit of wine, the question is, when will you use that wine? So there's wine as Kiddush, and then there's wine as making the meal more chashiv. Will you use it Friday night? Will you use it Shabbos day? That will be a Gavaldika topic. We're going to learn again about the concept of Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita, something that we already had before in Samaches, right? When we were learning the sugya, that when Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, then not only do we shecht the karbanos, but we even burn the chalavim, the emurim on Shabbos, even though by all karbanos, if you did not burn those fats that have to be burned, or those parts that have to be burned on the altar during day, you can always compensate at night. That's really the source from Maitiv, right? Shachris mincha tamid tamid. Where did Maitiv come from, and why is Maitiv originally only a reshus? Because there was no korban brought at night, but many times, if they couldn't burn all of the emurim at day, they would burn it at night. So the question is, when it comes to Shabbos, so you violate Shabbos only when you have to. So we shecht on the Pesach on Shabbos, you have to shecht it on the 14th in the afternoon. How about saying that only burn the emurim Motzoi Shabbos? We don't say that. We learned in the Mishnah that you burn the emurim on Shabbos. Why is that? Because of the theme of Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita. No, it's when you have to do something in a lachatchila dika time, it's that important that it also overrules the Shabbos if the mitzvah overrides the Shabbos. We're going to learn a similar theme regarding the kiddush, the verbal kiddush, that chaviva mitzvah b'shaita, even when there is a compensation. And at the end of Kufei, we're going to learn a braisa from which we are going to learn 7 dinim. It's common many times, shma minot las. We're going to have a shma minot tamnei. Just mentioning one of the 8 things we will learn from the Braisa is the concept of pigimas hakois. Pigimas, the word pogum, poigem means you are blemishing. We're not speaking about a physical blemish, we're speaking about a ruchnias dika blemish. And that is, when you drink out of a cup of wine, halachically, that wine is considered blemished wine, and lachatchila, one should not use that wine for a koi shel bracha on any level. Now, there are ways to rectify the pegima, as we'll speak out when we will learn the sugya. Chavra, let us start. We are in Daf Kufei, Amud Aleph. We have 3 lines from the top of the Amid. Says the Gemara the following, that Rav Hananya bar Shelemia and Talmidei Rav have a Yosef B'Sudasam. Chavra, this is Friday afternoon. And here again, they were zoicha to have this great waiter, and Vikoi Elyahu, who was attending them, the great Rav Hamnuna Savam. Amrulei. So they tell Rav Hamnuna, do us a favor, Zil Chazi, take a look, I Mekadesh Yoima. And because if it's already Shkia, if Shabbos began, then Nifsak, the Nikbe'e Shabbat. They basically proposed to do not what Rav did, but following the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda that you have to end the meal. But we're not focusing now on the detail of can you eat without making kiddush. The focus here is that there is a mitzvah to have a su'uda on Shabbos. And they felt that if they're not going to stop the meal, which then would mean mamash to akiras hashulchan, they would remove the tables, they would make birchas hamazon v'chulei, then even though they would be eating when it's dark, since it's a continuation from a choil, from a weekday meal, it won't be considered Su'udah Shabbos. And they're going to be missing in the mitzvah of having a meal on Friday night. This is where they were coming from. So Amar Lohu, the waiter was more learned than them. He tells them, no, loitzrichisu. You want to, they used the words, they wanted to be koiveya, they wanted to establish the meal as a Shabbos meal. That's not an issue. Why is that? Even if you don't make an interruption, even if you're not going to bench. Now, making kiddush is a different parsha. He's not saying to follow Rabbi Yossi. Not irrelevant. He says, when you're focusing on, will this meal be counted as a weekday meal because it began on the weekday, or whether it's going to be considered the Shabbos meal, Shapsa kaval nafshe. Shabbos establishes itself. Wow. And look inside the Rashbam, the second line under the Gemara. The Shabbos he kaval nafshe. Liseudasa. He added a lot more that the Gemara doesn't have to add because we are expected to know already. Let's not forget that we already learned that Rav was like Shmuel. Rav subscribes to Poides Mapo Mekadesh. No, it's since you have to make Kiddush, that's the Nakuda. If you would not make Kiddush, then you're right. But since you're not allowed to eat without Kiddush, says the Rashbam, this is what Rav Hamnuna Sava told the Chevre, Ein locha hefsik godol mizeh. So you made an interruption, even without benching. Umei'atzma su'udas Shabbos chashiva nivdelis mi su'udas choil. The day itself is so holy that it elevates the part of the meal that's being eaten during Shabbos. You're making Kiddush. Now it's automatically, you're not making a new hamoitzi. I don't care. It's going to be counted as Su'udah Shabbos. And therefore, just reading the last words, V'dai lochem beprisas mapa and Kiddush. And back inside the text of the Gemara. And the Amar Rav, and he's quoting Rav. Don't forget that you had, aside of Rab Hananya bar Shelemia, you had other Talmidei Rav. That Rav says that Kishem Shahashabbos Koivas Lemaser. So the general rules of Meiser, from when is one obligated to separate all of the Meisers, from when the product is complete. Now, that is normally when you smooth out the pile in the field when you are selling the produce. Or it is from when we have Ri'iyas Penei Habayis, when the produce is properly brought into the home. Now, when the product is not completely finished, biblically you can eat from it. Chachamim said, hold on, rabbinically, you can't have a su'udas keva. But a snack you can have. Before there was a chalois chiyuv minat Torah, even though the chachamim were more machmir, they were only machmir that don't have a real meal. But if you're snacking, you can snack. So if a person is going to Eretz Yisrael and they're just taking a fruit off the tree, even though the fruits were not properly harvested, and therefore there's no chiyuv midoraisa to take tithing, if you just want to have one fruit, you can do that, because it's called a snack. However, being that there is a mitzvah to eat on Shabbos, any little, even a little amount of food on Shabbos is going to be considered you're having Oinek Shabbos. So Shabbos adds so much chashivus to the food that you consume in it that you may not have what you would have called achilas arai, even though there's no biblical obligation because it's not called arai. That is what Rav taught. Rav says that just like Shabbos, koivas lemaser, the holiness of Shabbos elevates the way we categorize a meal. Everything you eat is called kavod Shabbos kodesh. So kach Shabbos koivas lekiddush. Meaning, you may not eat prior to Kiddush, that was the Poides Mappa, but on the flip side, as the Rashbam says, once you made Kiddush, even though you are not technically starting a new meal, you're not making a new Hamoitzi, you don't have to. This, what you're eating after Kiddush, is Suda Shabbos Kodesh. Now, Savur Minei, so they heard that, they accepted it from Rav Hamnuna Sava, but they thought that Kihecha the Kava LeKiddush, the same thing will be Kava LaHavdalah. And that's the new topic today. So they thought that when a person begins a meal, they begin it Shabbos afternoon, Shalosh Shudas, and now they enter Motzoi Shabbos. So you have to be Poides Mappa and to be Mavdil. Why is that? Because the meal automatically is downgraded. We're not, God forbid, minimizing the chashivos of what we call Su'udas Malava Malka, Su'udas David Malka Meshicha. But it's not Su'udas Shabbos. So if Shabbos is koivas, just like Shabbos is koivas when you enter Shabbos, the special, unique classification of a Shabbos meal, l'chu'ura, automatically should end when Shabbos ends. And if it's a different type of meal, it's a weekday meal. If it's a weekday meal, how can you have a weekday meal without making Havdalah? And by the way, that can be one of the sources of Shitas HaRambam that holds that making Havdalah is a biblical obligation. Everyone holds, we're going to learn that sugya tomorrow, that Kiddush is midoraisa. Where do we have in the Torah the obligation to make Kiddush? It says in the 10 Dibros, Zochoir es Yom HaShabbos Likatshoy, and that's the source of making Kiddush. The Rambam adds that just like God commanded us to sanctify the day by verbalizing words of holiness in the entry of Shabbos, we also biblically, according to the Rambam, have to sanctify the Shabbos by verbalizing words of separation when the Shabbos leaves. It's connected. In other words, you make Shabbos distinct. Shabbos is not, Shabbos has prior to Shabbos and there is post Shabbos. You have the 6 days before Shabbos, you have the 6 days after Shabbos. So if you have to verbally speak about the uniqueness, the separation of the holiness of Shabbos, you have to do it in both boundaries. So Shabbos is kaveh in the beginning, Shabbos should be kaveh in the end. And therefore what? They thought that you have to be Poides Mappa Mavdil, and we know that no one does. So Amalahu Rav Amram, no, that Rav himself addressed that. Hachiyom Rav, that lekiddush koivas, v'loi lahavdalah koivas. Wow. In other words, if you did not bench, just because the day left, that does not change the status of the meal. Adarabah, the meal is called a Shabbos meal because you began it during Shabbos. You are bringing, that's really the whole kavanah of our avoid al pi chasidus, dira betachtoinim, to bring the kedusha of something greater into the lower reality. So first we have to ourselves take a step up, right? Rav Meir Prem Nishlan, how can you? If we are connected to that which is lowly, right, we can't elevate anything. First, we have to elevate ourselves. That's Shabbos. We go up, but the end game is not for us to be holy. God has plenty of holy malachim. Our kavanah is, we need to have koyach. We have to go up, kiddush, but then we have to bring that holiness back in the lower part of reality. You know where this happens? When you go from Shabbos into the weekday and you don't bench right away, and you don't make havdalah. So on one hand, you can say it's the weekday. On the other hand, for you it's Shabbos. So you are extending the kedusha of Shabbos into the weekday. Yavaldik. However, a few details, which is, when we're quoting Rav Amram is saying is that if you began the meal, this is before Shkia, then you don't have to interrupt it. However, which is so important, because when you have a shul that people are washing for Shalosh Shudas, they have to wash before Shkia. Now, there's many limits to Shkia. You have the basic Alter Rebbe's edition of 4 minutes in the heavens, v'chulei. But if you did not wash before Shkia, you can't begin the meal without making Havdalah. Furthermore, umifsak nami lo yamrin and ela b'achila. No, it's when you began the meal, a meal has to be a bread, a hamoitzi meal. But if a person had what was common then, drinking meals, avol b'shasi aloi. No, it's even if you began drinking wine before Shkia, you can't say, I already began before Shkia and I can extend it to as late as I want. You can have Shalosh Shudas until Chatzos Halayla and Suda Shabbos. No, if you didn't begin washing, then you can't say that since I made a hagefen. And furthermore, v'shasiya nami lo yamaron ela b'chamer v'shichra. When may you not drink anything after Shkia, even if you began before Shkia but you didn't wash? That's when it comes to wine, chashuv. Even when it comes to the poor man wine, which is beer. Avol maya leislan ba. This is one shita, that water one is allowed to consume even though it's after Shkia on Shabbos afternoon, even though you didn't begin a bread meal prior, even though you didn't make Havdalah, mine is not chashuv. So you didn't make Havdalah, you want to drink water you can drink. However, upliga the rafuna. Because the rafuna, chaz yalahu gavra the shasa mayim kayim Havdalah. All he drank was water, and Amar lei, he gave him azam musad, that loy mistaf yimar, are you not afraid, ma'askara? Askara, many people translate as some sort of, it's called diphtheria. It's some sort of illness that ultimately results in the neck's muscles contracting, and that enables the person to breathe. And they are suffocating to death, and that's connected to Misas Chenek, and that's something that Tosfos writes to Mida Keneged Mida, as the Chazal tell us in Sanhedrin, that even though we don't execute the din, the Daled Misas based in are not being executed by the Sanhedrin until when they return imminently, but din Daled Misas loy paska. And in the place of Chenek, the Hashgacha Pratis brings about as a Askara. And imagine Askara for drinking only water. Says the Gemara that the Tanach Mishmei de Rabbi Akiva kol hatoyim klum koydem sheyavdol, and the klum, that's the diuk. What's anything, even mayim, is misase be'askara. However, you should know that that's subject to a machlokes. However, that Rabbanan devei Rav Ashi loy kapti amaya. But the nekuda is whether mayim is an exception or not. That there is no paidas mapo mavdil. Shabbos, you will not classify a meal that you are eating 10 p.m. as a Motzoi Shabbos Malava Malka meal if you washed before Shkia. Masha Enkin, in the opening of Shabbos, it doesn't work that way. Even if you washed on Friday afternoon, Shabbos is koivas in the beginning. That's classified as a Shabbos meal. If you're having a Shabbos meal, you have to make Kiddush, which is why we go that Peiris Mapo Mekadosh. Says the Gemara Vayter. Back to Friday night.
How do we paskin on the water?
I don't remember, Yaakov, but it's a din in Shulchan Aruch. Let's take a look over here. Yeah, I don't see any a mishpat and mitzvah, not here, not there. I'll check up. I'll look it up. Okay, right. Mi shalai kiddush b'erev Shabbos. Oh, someone did not make kiddush on Friday night. Ma'u sheyikadosh v'hoilach kol hayom kulai. Oh. Like we mentioned in the intro, that there is a huge difference between Kiddush Friday night and Kiddush Shabbos day. Kiddush Friday night is of biblical origin, and not only do we drink wine, therefore we make a bracha of yayin, but we also make a bracha of Kedusha. Mekadesh HaShabbos. Kiddush Shabbos Day is of rabbinic origin. And all we need to do is make a Boire Priya Gofen. Nice that we add many beautiful psukim, but we don't make a bracha that is a Baruch Ata Hashem Mekadesh. We don't say that. His question was, if a person did not make Kiddush Friday night, and they're going to make Kiddush Shabbos Day, will they now say the Nusach of the Kiddush of Friday night on Shabbos Day? Because they have to verbalize the words of Kedusha. Mitzadecha, Shabbos is Mekacha V'Kaima. On the other hand, we add to that Kedusha also by saying Kiddush. So why would we miss out? Is there a Nishdak and Falfalin when it comes to Kiddush? So that was the question that was asked of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So Amar Lei, to which he responds to Ravina, that mi da amri b'nei Rabbi Chia, that mi shalei hivdil b'matzoi Shabbos, which is ideally when you're supposed to make Havdalah, Havdil v'hoilach kol Shabbos kulei. Shabbos here means week. By the way, it doesn't mean the whole week. It does not mean the whole week. We can only make Havdalah up until the end of Tuesday. It's interesting that the first 3 days after Shabbos are very much connected to the Shabbos prior, and Wednesday on is already connected to the next Shabbos. And as we have in the Hayom Yom, right, that's why we say L'chuna Ranana. We say L'chuna Ranana on the shiur Shel Yom of Yom Revi because it's already coming into the new Shabbos. Und sinerane sich nicht. But coming back over here. So, Hachinami, so just like you can compensate for Havdalah, so he said, Hachinami, Misha L'Kiddush B'Erev Shabbos, yes, Mikadosh V'Oilach Kol Yom Kuloi. Post facto, don't only make Aboyre Priya Gofen, make also the Mekadesh HaShabbos Bracha. Fragt the Gemara on Yurav Nachman, it says in a Braisa, Leili Shabbos, as well as Leili Yom Tov, they share the following qualities, they share the following rules. Yesh Behem Kedusha Ala Kois, like we just explained. Not only do we say Boire Priya Gofen, but we have in the Nusach of Kiddush the words of sanctification. Another detail of Leili Shabbos and Leili Yom Tov, v'yesh behem askara b'birchas hamazon, that there is an add-on in benching Shabbos, let's say, on Yom Tov, Yalav v'yaveh. I know this is also for the day, but we'll see. Shabbos v'Yom Tov, however, when it comes to the day of Shabbos, when it comes to the day of Yom Tov, ein behem kedusha ala kois. We make a Boire Priya Gofen. We make Kiddush. But we don't say the words of Kedusha. So that is where the day is dissimilar to the night. Regarding the second statement in the Braisa, add-on is the same. However, v'yesh behem askara b'birchas hamazon, end of Braisa, says the Gemara, challenging Rav Nachman v'isal kadaitach, that you're right. That mi shalei kiddush be'erev Shabbos, mikadesh v'hoilach kol hayom kuloi. So how can the Braisa say that there is no Kedusha during the day? It's not true. Shabbos v'Yom Tov nami, mishkachas diyesh bahem Kedusha ala kois. Which is, according to Rav Nachman, the Eloi Kiddush, me'urta, if you didn't make Kiddush at night, yes, mekadesh, l'machar mekadesh is not the way we slang Kiddush. You say the bracha of mekadesh HaShabbos. So Rav Nachman says, what kind of question is that? Amalei de'i, if you didn't make, like Tani, just because the Braisa didn't make such a difference, it's not because the Braisa made that there's different. Shabbos day doesn't have Mekadesh. No, it doesn't have. The Braisa is Lechatchila. B'di'evet, di'i, if you didn't make it, then yes, you make it during the day. And the one who asked the question didn't view it that way. He felt that if the words of Kedusha are Shaykh to Shabbos day, then the Braisa should not have made that nafkamina. Okay, another kasha against Rav Nachman. Esvei. And we spoke this out on the intro. There's something called kavoid. Kavoid includes eating. Says the Braisa, kavoid yoim, or kavoid laila. If you, kavoid means to add delicacies. So we, Baruch Hashem, we're blessed that we can afford to buy both for the Friday night, special meal, Shabbos day, special meal. If a person cannot afford, right, you want to eat meat on Shabbos, well, you're going to have it either for Friday night or Shabbos day. Which one takes precedence? Says the Braisa that the kavoid yoim is, or kavoid laila, kavoid yom koidim. And I want to add something. What gives chashivus to a meal is not only meat, it's also wine, a side of Kiddush. That means if you have a side of the two reviusin, minimum, one for the Friday night Kiddush, one for the Boire Priya Gofen of Shabbos day, if you had extra wine, and you want to pick which time, which meal should you use it for, kavoid yom koidim. But that's only if Kiddush is covered. However, says the Braisa, ve'im ein lo elo kois echad, if you only have 1 cup of wine for Kiddush, so then the din is, Oimer Olav, Kufei Yomid Beis, Kiddush Hayoim, use that for Friday night. It's confusing, but that's what it means. Use it for Friday night. Why? Because Kiddush Hayoim, if you have to pick between either doing Kiddush properly or being Machabed, the meal properly, Kiddush Hayoim Koidem, Lekavod Yom, Lekavod Laila. Kiddush is more important than giving kavod by adding to the meal. And now we have a Gavaldik Kasha. Don't forget that kavod is also of importance. But like many times, if you have clashing values, then you have to organize the values. You have to do that which is even more important. But here, if b'di'evet, if you don't say the words of Kiddush, Mekadesh or Shabbos Friday night, you can say it Shabbos morning, then why would you have to pick and choose between these values? Why would you not say use the wine for Shabbos day? You're not going to lose the Kiddush, because if you didn't make Kiddush Friday night, then you can say it Shabbos day. Gavaldik. Ve'im Isa, then lish bekei ad l'macher, leave the wine until the day, and v'la'avet beitarta. So both you're going to say the Mekadesh Shabbos, and you will enhance the Shabbos day meal because you're going to be having wine. To which the Gemara responds, like we had this on Daf Samach. From here we see how chaviva mitzvah b'shaita, even though there are mitzvahs that midoi raisa, they have what we would call a lachatchila and a b'di'evet. The lachatchila is so important that it trumps all else. We burn the chalavim ve'ivarim on Shabbos Erev Pesach. Why burn it at night? No, chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. The shaita of making kiddush is at night. Yes, kavod yom is more important than kavod laila. So what? Kiddush should be said dafke at night. Now, by Daf Samach, we were applying Chaviva mitzvah b'shaita when it comes to a mitzvah of action. Most mitzvahs are mitzvahs of maisius, burning the emurim. Here we are applying Chaviva mitzvah b'shaita to a mitzvah of words, to a verbal mitzvah. That's the kasha. Mi amrinim Chaviva mitzvah b'shaita, as the Rishonim explain. Everyone subscribes to Chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. The question is, are we applying this even to verbal mitzvahs? No. V'hatanya, did we not learn? And this is going to be an amazing braisa. V'hatanya nichmas l'beis v'matzoi Shabbos. When you come on Matzoi Shabbos, mevarech al hayayin, then v'al hamor. That's already Beis Shammai. V'al hapsamim. And then v'achar kach omer avdol ala kois. Furthermore, v'im ein loy ela kois echad. And now, guys, we already had this on Daf Kuf Beis and Beis. We're speaking here again, second time today, about the importance of Su'udas Malava Malka, and ideally a meal. And when you have a meal, you should bench ala kois. You only have 1 cup. If you will use it for havdalah, then you won't be able to make the zimun al hakois by birchas hamazon from Malava Malka. So says the Braisa, manichoy ad la'achar hamazon. You are allowed. Imagine to eat Malava Malka without making Havdalah. Kuf, hey, Amad Aleph. If you have water before Havdalah, misasei ba'askara, lo listafi mar ma'askara. And here we're saying, because of the chashivos of Su'udas Malava Malka, compounded with the chashivos of always benching ala kois after a meal, and that was the Tosfos and Daf Kuf Beis, right? Kuf Beis Amad Beis, that Tosfos writes, right, I'm reading inside the Tosfos over there. The vaday bechinam ein loy lechol koydem avdala. Avol kishe ein loy elo kois echad muter lechol koydem avdala kedei lasois al hakois birchas hamazon. Wow! So you can eat. That's the way we learned the pshat and the brayse according to Tosfos. And now you have to bench. Now what comes first? So this brayse says that umishalshalin kulan la'acharov. After you bench, no, it's the first one is birchas hamazon. Then you follow the same seder. Then you do yayin, moed, psamim, and havdalah. And here's the kasha. The kasha is that even though you are allowed to keep the wine for after benching, you are allowed to do so, but the ideal time to make havdalah is right after Shabbos, before a meal. So why don't we view this also as a lechatchila and a b'di'evet? And if we are saying that we apply chaviva mitzvah b'shaita even to a verbal mitzvah, and therefore even though there is a value of kavod yom, which is greater than kavod laila, but don't push off the kiddush for the yom, in order to have both the Kiddush and the Kavod Yom. No, Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita. So we're not accepting. Based on Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita, we're asking, V'lo Yamrin Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita. And l'chayda, we should have still made Havdalah first. You're not going to have a koishal bracha for Birchas Hamazon, Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita. That should take precedence. So Rav Nachman is not refuted. And the first thing he said was, and this is so important, this is a klal, Torah Shebal Peh is a tradition that goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have kashas. But when we have a question, the question doesn't change our tradition. The question means that we don't have the merit to yet understand. So you have a good kasha. But first thing Rav Nachman says that my klal, that if you have only 1 cup of wine, that you're going to use it for the kiddush of the night, even though it's going to diminish, you won't be able to fulfill the kavod of the yom. I want you to know, ano loy chakima ano. As Rashi says, I did not apply Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita from my own Chachma. If it would come from me, then I would accept that your kasha would refute me. But it's not my own. V'loy choyza ano, says the Rashbam. I didn't say it like a magid. A magid meaning you're saying it metazar ruach hakodesh. Just to know what the word magid means. We understand the magid were people that were great arshanim. No, the magid is like the magid of the Beis Yosef. Magid is a certain person who has a certain level of seeing that which others cannot. Furthermore, my tradition is also v'lo yichidana. It's not a das yachid. That if it would only be a das yachid, and now you find the braisa which somehow implies that we don't say chaviva mitzvah b'shaita to a verbal mitzvah, then you would refute me. Koydem kol, you should know elo gomarno v'sodarna no. Who am I? First of all, I received a tradition. I received Torah Shebal Peh. Now people can make mistakes. But the ones who were given the opportunity to be what we would call the choizrim, so you had chazara. And if you don't learn and don't review, you'll forget. And not only that, but he was misaded his learnings in front of the chevra and the chayzrim, the chief chayzer of the Rebbe. And if he would make a mistake, people would correct him. So Rav Nachman was certain that this is the tradition, and when I reviewed it, no one commented against it. That what? That chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. Chaviva mitzvah b'shaita means that the importance of being mekadesh at night is more important. Do it at night, even though if you would push it off for the day, you would accomplish kavod yom. No, chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. Now you have a kasha from the Braisa, but now he explains that there's a difference between the Braisa and Kiddush. And by the way, this would also go back to the whole sugi that we learned today on Amud Aleph regarding Poides Mapo Umavdal, the same logic. Poides Mapo Umavdal will mean that we make Havdalah immediately. Now we are all out to sanctify the Shabbos. We are all out, L'chalpi Chasidus, to bring the Kedusha of Shabbos into the weekday. So on one hand, to begin Shabbos, the sooner the better. And the added Kedusha that we bring into Shabbos, that's Mekacha V'Kaima, but through our Avodah, beginning with our words of Kiddush, the sooner the better. When it comes to making Havdalah, what are you doing with Havdalah? You're doing the opposite, you're ending Shabbos. There's an advantage of not Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita. Here it's advantageous to delay Havdalah. Gewaldig. But he didn't give the answer right away. That's important. When a person has bittul, this is the Torah Shebal Peh. Many things we don't yet understand. But when we learn, it's not that since we don't understand, it's wrong. We are wrong. When you have that bittul, then Hashem gives you the seichel to chap. So now it says, Shanalon bein ayule yoima lafuke yoima. How can you compare one with the other? Ayule yoima, when the day is coming in, there we say, kol kama demaktimino lo adif. The sooner you make Kiddush, the better. Maybe you can even argue that it's an amayla of being Mekabel Shabbos early, because you're adding to Shabbos, you're beginning Shabbos earlier. And not only is it better to be magdamid, but umechavivan, it shows that we cherish it. There's a chefza and there's a gavra. You're being Mekadesh Shabbos earlier, you have a chefza that's greater, more of Shabbos. It expresses your love to Shabbos earlier. And let's use that logic. But afuke yoima. But when it comes to saying goodbye to Shabbos, the opposite. Ma'achrin, we delay saying goodbye. This is on the Gavra. It should not appear that Shabbos is a burden and the first opportunity is Shabbos. So that's why when it comes to Havdalah, we dafke don't say Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita. And yes, we have this virtue of benching al hakois. And let's learn the Gemara with Shitas Tosfos that yes, you are allowed to eat a meal before Havdalah because it's not Bechinam. And now the question will be, just to speak out what everyone talks about, the Havamina of delaying Kiddush for a Shabbos day, what would that mean? Would it mean the same thing, that we would be allowed to eat at night without Kiddush over a kois? Because of Kavod Yoim, it's not Bechinam? Or would it mean to make Kiddush on Challah? That's a big topic, that you can make Kiddush b'di'evid without wine. But then again, that's a big topic, but let's go right. Now that we quoted this Braisa of Hanichnas Lo Beis Matzoi Shabbos, so says the Gemara Shma Mino, from this Braisa we learn, Shma Mino Memas Nisan, Tamnya 8 rules. Let's count them. Rule number 1, Shma Mino, that I'm Avdol B'Tefilla. And we're going to unpackage each one later. When we daven Shmoina Esrei Motzoi Shabbos, we add words of Havdalah in the Shmoina Esrei. Hamavdol B'Tefilla, even though you said Atachayin Antanu, nevertheless, Sarach Sheyavdol Al HaKois. Because if not, it's a non-issue. If the Havdalah that we say would also allow us to eat, then what's the issue? You don't have enough wine, and if you have enough wine, you wouldn't have to do it. Number 1. And that's the halacha. Number 2, Shma Mino, that beracha to una kois. Again, who says Birchas Hamazon needs a kois? It's that important. It's that important that you don't make Havdalah. You eat before Havdalah. Not water. You eat a su'udah. Because beracha to una kois. And that's if you only have 1 cup of wine, ein lecha bereda. Rule number 3, V'shma Mino, koishel bracha tzarech shiur. The shiur we know is a revius. Because if you don't have to have a minimum amount, what do you mean you don't have enough wine? However little you have, divided into 2. No, you have to have a revius. Now, v'shma mino hamavarach tzarech sheyitoim. That you, as we'll learn in Kuvav, that making a bracha while holding a cup in itself is beautiful, gives chashivus to the mitzvah. But it's not enough. We'll see that's midrabanan. But you have to taste some from the cup. And why is that? Because if you would not have to taste anything from the cup, then make Havdalah over the kois shel yain. You have 1 revius. Don't drink of it. You made Havdalah al hakois. Now you can eat and have a meal and then drink the cup after you make the zimun al hakois. No, when you make a bracha al hakois, you have to taste from it. So that's the whole problem. If you're going to taste from the cup, you won't have enough for the minimum shiur for Havdalah. Now, Shma Mino 5, that ta'amoi pigamoi. Now this is something that will have to be explained. So let's go the way we'll learn the Havamina, the way Tosfos explains it. That this is 5, number 5. The Havamina here is that you have a little bit more than a revius. Why did the Gemara think that that's a big kasha? It's not that you only have exactly 1 revius, and if you'll drink a drop of that kois, then you won't have the shiur for Havdalah. That's not the case. You don't have 2 revius in, but you have a revius plus. So the question is, if that will be the case, if you have a little bit more than a revius, why don't you make Havdalah ala kois? You don't have to have Rav kois, not to dishonor the kois shel bracha, which is Shma Mino number 4, tzarech sheyitoim. The word yitoim doesn't mean to drink a malei lugma. Yitoim certainly doesn't mean to drink Rav revius. Yitoim means to taste it. So why don't you taste a little bit of Havdalah? And based on the premise that you don't have exactly a revius, you have a revius plus at least a little bit, and now again you can fulfill everything lechatchila. Make Havdalah, ala kois, taste from the Havdalah, you will still have a revius left over, and you can make a kois shel bracha. But that was not accepted. You know why that was not accepted? Because if you drink out of a cup of wine, you render all of the remaining wine spiritually blemished. And blemished wine is kosher, but you don't use it for a bracha. More about that soon. Now, if the Braisa, Chevra, is speaking about someone that has exactly a revius, then there is no proof that ta'amai pegamai at all. It can be that you have exactly a revius. Now that we said Shma Mino number 4, that hamavarich tzarech sheyitoim, so the moment you taste it, you're not going to have the minimum, which is why you delay it for later. Shmamina, another Shmamina, Ta'am Mavdil. And the Rashbam will, again, this is all from that next daf Kuvav. There are those who hold that once you ate food, even though you should not have, you can't make Havdalah after you eat. You have to make Havdalah dafka before you eat. Because as we just mentioned, we make Havdalah in the Shemona Esrei. And that is Matir Malacha. The whole Havdalah ala kois is in order to allow us to eat. So if a person, even if b'shoigig, whatever, if a person ate, then they can't make Havdalah. Because then what are you making Havdalah for? And Taka, there's a shita that we'll learn in Daf Kuvav, that if a person ate Motzoi Shabbos, you know when they make Havdalah? They wake up Sunday morning, and before they eat Sunday morning, they make Havdalah. Our Braisa obviously does not subscribe to that, that even if you were ta'am, even though you ate food, right afterwards you make Havdalah. You make it by Koishal Baracha, but you make it Motzoi Shabbos, Daf Kuvav, up to number 7, the way we're counting it. Vishmamina, another sugya we learned a few daf ago, you're going to end up benching and doing Havdalah, which are not the same Kedusha. You're doing 2 Kedushas on 1 cup. That Oimer Beis Kedushas ala kois. But let us add the words we had above, because you don't have an option. It's definitely not ideal, but it's only a lachatchila dikadin. And if you only have 1 cup, then yes, you're going to articulate 2 brachas, 2 mitzvahs on 1 cup. Al kois echad, and the final one, vishmamina, that this braisa is following Bishamai according to Rabbi Yehuda. If you remember, because according to Rabbi Meir, what did we learn? That Rabbi Meir held that the only machlokes between Bishamai and Beis was the seder of Psamim Ner Psamim. But everyone holds that Birchas HaMazon, right? That was, but everyone will hold here. Birchas HaMazon comes first. That's the word. Here, Birchas HaMazon, Mishal Shalom Kulan La'achrav means Birchas HaMazon, and then Yayin Moed Psamim. And that's only the Shita of Beis Shammai according to Rabbi Yehuda. And again, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Beis Hillel will be Birchas HaMazon. Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says that everyone agrees that HaMazon comes first. And like we explained, because HaMazon is connected to the meal. And everyone agrees that Havdalah comes last. The machlokes is which one of Neir B'Samim come first, and Beis Shammai, Aliyah de Rabbi Yehuda, is the Tan of this Brais. Okay, let's go a little bit weiter. Says the Gemara that when Avashi learned the Braisa, he was troubled. He was troubled on the Shmamina number 5. Why was he troubled? Like we mentioned, the premise should be that the guy only has 1 revius. And once we establish that Hamavarach Tzarach Sheyitoim, and once we establish prior to that in Shmamina number 3 that Koishal Bracha needs a minimum amount, which is a revius, so how do you know that Ta'amai Pagamai? There's no proof. Maybe there's no such a concept of Pigimas HaKois. The reason why you can't use the cup for Havdalah and then for Birchas HaMazon is because each one needs a minimum amount. You only have the minimum amount. You have to make a bracha and you have to taste a little bit. If you'll taste a little bit, you will consume some of it. You won't have the minimum amount for Koishal Bracha. Ravashi Amar, that Ta'amai Pigamai is really, and Koishal Bracha needs a shiur Chadamilsehi. Now it's very important, as the Rishonim point out, Rav Ashi is not arguing with the concept of Pigimas HaKois. All Rav Ashi is saying is, don't give me Shmamina Tamnei. You don't have that detail you can't prove from the Braisa. You don't know if the Braisa is speaking about someone that has a Revius Plus. Maybe if there would have been a Revius Plus, then you can make Havdalah, only taste a little bit, and you can use the cup again. Narvus then, V'hachi Ka'amar. I don't mind you using the words. My tama ta'amai pigamai, not a ruchnias dika pigam. Pigamai means that you blemished it, you diminished the quantity. Mishum sins koishal bracha tzarach shiur, and you only had a revius, so when you taste it, you have less than the shiur. But as many understand that even Rav Ashi does subscribe to pigimas hakois, he just says you can't prove it from this braisa. Now, the Braisa was speaking about tasting from a cup. Now, let me ask a question. What happens if I have a jug of wine, a bottle, and I'm going to drink out of the bottle? It's not the etiquette, but I drink out of the bottle. Would we say that since I'm going to now take the wine from the bottle and pour it into another cup to make a bracha on it, does the pigima go away because the wine left the keli from which I consumed it from, or not? So says the Gemara that Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi, not only did he understand as we know, as we paskin, the concept in Kuf Pei Beis and Shulchan Aruch, the concept of pigimas hakois. Forget about the revius. If you drink out of a cup, that wine, as is, cannot be used for any mitzvah. It's blemished. Not only because you drank it out of the cup, even if you drank it out of a pitcher, he was makbid achatzbaz, a pitcher, that it's poigamit. Or the counter to that would be that I drink it out of the pitcher, so then the wine in the pitcher is pogum. But maybe the moment you pour it from the pitcher into a clean cup, since the wine changed locations, it's almost like the pegima has to do with the keli, not with the oir. So the keli became pogum. If you change kelim, then the wine is good. But he didn't understand it that way. Rabbi Yaakov holds that the pegam is in the light, not in the vessel. So who cares that you're going to move it from the pitcher to the cup? You drank out of that wine, so that wine is blemished. And Avidi Bar Shisha disagreed with that. He was makbid only on the cup. Keli not the oir. And Mar Bar Avashi was the most. He was kapet afilu achavisa pigimasa. Forget about a pitcher. Not only is it poigim the yayin, it's poigim the oir, but if you have a barrel has in it, who knows, hundreds of pitchers. If someone would drink out of a barrel, all of the wine is pogum, oy gewalt. None of that wine can be used for kaishel bracha. Now, as the Alter Rebbe paskins, it's just a chazar these dinim in Simon Kuf Pei Beis. We also just learned this recently in our Shulchan Aruch class. Is that there is a way to rectify pigimas hakois. There is an easy tikkun, and many people get confused. So it's good to speak it out. The way to be misak in the cup is to pour even only one drop of wine into the kois from a source that was not pogum. You don't need to have roiv wine to be mevatel the miut wine that's pogum. If you have a cup and you drink from it and you pour one drop of new wine from a bottle or from another cup that's not pogum, then it's not called pigimas hayayin. 1 second. And Alter Rebbe also writes there is another way to take away the pigima, and that is pouring it back into the bottle. But there you need to have roiv. Many people witness, you pour here, you pour there, they don't chop which order. In other words, if I have a little bit of wine in my cup left, relative to the wine I have 50% plus, I have a majority in the bottle, then when I pour the pogum wine into the bottle, the pogum wine will become bottle biroiv. But when I have, sometimes I'm going to have very little wine left in the bottle. So if I'm going to pour it back into the bottle, it could be that there is more pogum than non-pogum, then you were not masaking it. So the Alter Rebbe emphasizes the importance, first pour from the bottle into the cup. First pour from the bottle into the cup. Now all of that is unpoigimed, and then pour it back into the bottle. This is very common. Very common. Many times people don't want to drink. By Havdalah, I see this many times. People, they drink the minimum amount, but they're not going to be drinking wine. So they don't want to waste the wine. Fine, you can pour it back into the bottle, but get into the habit that first from wine into the cup, and then you can pour it back into the barrel. Chavra, to be continued. Any questions?